Hi, my name is Trevor Klee. This is my video on the LSAT reading comprehension process, specifically for difficult passages. Now, I've done a video on my process in general, and I've done a video on my process for paired passages. And I want to talk today about my process for difficult passages. Because when I work with my tutoring clients, usually there's just like one or two passages that they're just like, I have no idea what's going on. And that's normal. That usually happens in humanities specifically. In humanities passages, I often find people will have like no idea what's going on, especially if they didn't take lots of English classes or sociology classes or whatever, because there's a weird way of writing those. It also happens sometimes in science, but today I'm going to be focusing on humanities. So I'm going to talk about my process in general, and then I'm going to talk about my process in specific. By the way, before I forget, if you want this passage as well as a bunch of other passages, answers, and explanations, like strategies for doing the entirety of reading comprehension, please check out my guide to the reading comprehension passage, which is available on my Gumroad page, gumroad.com/Trevor Klee. All right. That being said, let's go through this. So first of all, generally, my process is always based on the idea you're never going to be tested on the entirety of the reading comprehension passage. You're never going to be asked to write an essay on it, and you're never going to be asked to, write a free-form response. You're asked specific questions about, the specific parts of the passage. So our task here is just to know what we need to know in order to answer the questions. We don't need to know anything beyond that. And that's especially important for these difficult passages, because if you try to understand everything in these difficult passages, you're going to get really lost. Just learn, you need to know exactly what they test you on, and just spend your time on that. Don't spend your time on anything else. And of course, that's easier said than done. So let's talk about our steps here. So our first step is we're going to skim the passage to get a basic idea of what the passage is about and how it's organized. And so we're always going to be focusing on the first sentence, last sentence of each paragraph. And that's going to really tell us, what the passage is about and, how it's organized, how it progresses. And when we're doing this, we're not only making sure we understand it, but we're really making sure we pay attention to our point of view. I was teaching someone just the other day about how to approach humanities passages, who is sort of combining, what the different parts of the passage says. Like they were trying to say the author says this, and I would have to correct, no, the author doesn't say that. The person the author is talking about says that. It's unclear what the author believes. So, we're always going to pay particularly close attention to author versus, subject of the passage. Because sometimes they're actually at odds. Next up, so we skim the passage. We're paying specific attention to the first and last sentence. If you're a really slow reader, only read the first and last sentence. If you're a faster reader, you can read all of it, but focus on the first sentence, last sentence. So that should be enough to answer a main purpose. Next up, we go to the questions. Each question, we're going to analyze it for key terms, which will tell us which section of the passage we need to read more thoroughly. These key terms, they're going to jump out to you in reading comprehension in these difficult passages, because they're going to be really weird. You're going to see this with this passage. There's going to be some really weird terms that you're not familiar with in this passage. So, you just sort of have to accept them as like a variable, this is something, they're going to mention like post-structuralism, and that's just X. So, if you see post-structuralism in a question, just, we're going to look we're going to look for which parts of the passage talk about post-structuralism. We're not going to worry a ton about what does that mean. It's a variable. It's X or Y. In the passage itself, we find and read the exact sentence or sentences required by the question. So that part's really important. Like, again, don't read the whole passage. Don't get confused on, oh, I need to mix this and this. We're just looking for X, right? This is the part of the passage that talks about post-structuralism. We go to this part of the passage. We learn about post-structuralism. So we have to read this carefully, and this can get complicated if it's like a sentence or two. By the way, if the question asks about context, what's the context of this? What's the purpose of it? Why does the author mention this? We're going to have to read the sentence before and maybe after. So that's how we get the context for this. Sometimes it'll just ask for a detail, and we'll just look for, okay, let's find the exact sentence. Sometimes it'll ask for context. We look at the sentence before and maybe after. Once we've read that, we return to the question, and we now look through our answer choices. We read and analyze each answer choice carefully, crossing out any that seem incorrect. And, I'm going to actually double underline carefully. Most people who I tutor make the mistake of they focus more of their effort on reading the passage than they do on reading the answer choices, which is totally incorrect. You should focus more of your effort on reading the answer choices, not reading the passage. Now, if the questions are just like, something like, which of the following is not mentioned in the passage or something like that, if there's nothing in the question that has key terms, we just go all the way to step 4, and then we carry out that same process with our answer choices. So we cross out any that seem incorrect, and then we're probably going to come down to like 2 or 3 that we're not sure on, and we're going to have to go back to the passage in order to figure out, which ones of those are the most, which one of those are correct. So, if there's no key terms in the question, we have to look at the key terms in the answer choice. All right, so this is generally what we're talking about. So it's based on this simple idea: skim, questions, passage, answer choices. And now an important thing too is if you mess up on a passage, you're gonna if you get a question wrong, what's gonna happen is you've gotten one of these wrong, right? You got the skimming wrong, you got the question, analyzing the question wrong, you got analyzing the passage wrong, or you got analyzing the answer choices wrong. So when you're troubleshooting, when you're going back and being like, okay, how can I do this better? That's a really important thing. Which step did you get wrong? All right, so, you ready for a long, difficult passage? I hope so, because that's what we're doing. So I'm just going to be reading first sentence, last sentence here, especially, look at the lengths of these paragraphs. Also, it should be worth noting, this is a adapted passage from Wikipedia. It is not an actual passage from the LSAT, because the LSAT does not allow that, because they're jerks. So I'm just reading an actual passage I'm reading an adapted passage from Wikipedia, and these questions are adapted from actual LSAT questions. All right, let's go through this, long, difficult passage together. So first sentence: Jean Baudrillard, French sociologist, cultural theorist, been broadly associated with the post-structuralist movement, although his beliefs went further than simple post-structuralism. In fact, he viewed meaning as near enough self-referential. One object's meaning is only understandable through its relation to the meaning of other objects. All right, so what's this first sentence about? He's been associated with post-structuralists, but his beliefs went further. Okay, so this is what we're already expecting, right? We're talking about Jean Baudrillard. We're going to talk about him in post-structuralism and how he goes further than that. And in fact, one of the ways he goes further is that meaning is self-referential. So one object's meaning is only understandable through its relation to the meaning of other objects. If you understand what that last sentence means, then great. If you don't, we'll go back to it if we need to for these answer choices. All right. From this starting point, Baudrillard theorized broadly about human society based on this kind of self-referentiality. This is not to say that the world becomes unreal, but rather the faster and more comprehensive societies begin. All right. So from this starting point, right, self-referentiality, going further than post-structuralism, Baudrillard theorized broadly about human society. And then we've got some of his theories down here, which seem really like dense, and I don't feel like going through it right now. So I'm only going to go through that if I have to through the answer choices. This is what it's like in a really difficult passage. You can't go through everything. All right. Accordingly, Baudrillard argued that the excess of signs and of meanings in late 20th century global society had caused an effacement of reality, situation which post-structuralists ignored entirely in their analyses of relations of power. So this is a really tough sentence here. But what we can say is the excess of signs and of meaning, right? This is something that Baudrillard argued in late 20th century global society had caused, I don't know what that means, but we can say it's a situation which post-structuralists had ignored. So they ignored something, right? There was an excess of signs and of meaning in late 20th century society, and this caused a situation in which that post-structuralist has ignored, and we get this destabilizes society, leading it to become more insecure, unstable, and vulnerable to symbolic acts. So again, if we look at this whole thing, we get Baudrillard is, part of like sort of in context post-structuralism, but he's going further. Big part of him going further is meaning is self-referential. He theorizes broadly about human society based on self-referentiality. These are his theories. And then he says the excess of signs and of meaning had caused, in 20th century society, had caused something, which was a situation that post-structuralists had ignored, right? So in terms of him going further, this is an important thing, right? They're ignoring something that's important about late 20th century global society. So we have the basic meaning here. There's definitely stuff here we don't entirely understand. We'll see if we need to go back and understand it. All right. What is the primary purpose of this passage? In contrast to most post-structuralists, Baudrillard argued that the search for and the excess of signs in modern society had led to social instability. I mean, that's okay, right? In contrast to most post-structuralists, so that's all right. Search for and the excess of signs. I do remember that in the last paragraph. So I'm like, okay on this one. I'm not super sure. Baudrillard believed that meaning was found through interrelation. I didn't see anything about that. Baudrillard believed that as meaning was self-referential, it is impossible to agree with the post-structuralist theory of the formation of knowledge. I didn't see formation of knowledge, so I'm going to say no. Baudrillard created meaning through difference in his work, which we're not even mentioning post-structuralists. Baudrillard argued that human society could only be understood through self-referentiality, which is why it is impossible. This doesn't mention post-structuralists either. So A is the only one that mentions post-structuralists, so I like that. And then the societal instability, I saw that in the third paragraph. So this is all right. And he analyzed society in the second paragraph. So I don't love A, but A is sort of the best here for me. Because we mentioned post-structuralism and we mentioned, sort of the societal instability, which we saw in the third paragraph. So that's something. All right. Which of the following statements would Ferdinand de Saussure most likely agree with? So this is one I don't know because I didn't, actually pay attention to whatever Ferdinand de Saussure said. So I go back to my passage. I look for Ferdinand de Saussure and I see him here. And let's see what we get here. So following on, I'm going to read the whole sentence as appears. Following on from the structuralist linguist Ferdinand de Saussure, Baudrillard argued that meaning, value, is created through difference, through what something is not. So dog means dog because it's not cat, not goat, not tree, etc. All right, so I think I get what this is meaning. So Baudrillard is agreeing with Ferdinand de Saussure about meaning being created through difference. So like dog is dog because it's not cat, not goat, not tree. All right, so I think I get that. Like it's this idea of like, if the meaning of words is something about like that they don't mean other things. I don't know what this value part means, but whatever. So with what Ferdinand de Saussure would agree with, I think it's just like the dog means dog because it doesn't mean cat. Dog means dog because that's what it says in the dictionary. No. Dog means dog because that's what's agreed on in conversation. No. Cat gains its meaning through not meaning dog, lion, or any other word. Yeah, that's pretty much the same thing, right? Dog means dog because it doesn't mean cat. Cat means cat because it doesn't mean dog. Words only gain meaning through relations of power. No. No word means anything. No. Which of the following is not mentioned in the passage? Oof. Well, let's go through and look at our answer choices. We'll cross out any that seem unlikely, and then we may have to search for the rest of these. Baudrillard's relation to post-structuralism, that's definitely mentioned. Baudrillard's beliefs about how relations of power affect formation of knowledge, I don't know, maybe. An example of the terms that Baudrillard came up with to explain his view, probably. Baudrillard's application of his theories to modern society. Yeah, I mean, we definitely had something like that, right? Because he's like, yeah, the effect of an excess of science. I remember seeing that. So it's either B or C, because we definitely talked about Baudrillard in modern society. So I'm going to look at relations of power, see if I can find that anywhere. So not mentioned in the passage, relations of power. Oh, I see it right there. Just sort of jumped out at me. Relations of power. I was lucky. So we get, let's read the full sentence. In contrast to most post-structuralists, such as Michel Foucault, for whom the formations of knowledge emerge only as a result of relations of power, Baudrillard instead developed theories in which the excessive, fruitless search for total knowledge leads only almost inevitably to a kind of delusion. Geez. All right, let me see if I can understand this. So the post-structuralists, like Foucault, say knowledge is formed because of relations of power, whatever that means. Baudrillard instead says the excessive, fruitless search for knowledge leads almost to a kind of delusion. All right, so Baudrillard says formations of knowledge, relations of power. Baudrillard says you look for knowledge and it leads to delusion. So yeah, I don't think we get Baudrillard's beliefs about how relations of power affect formations of knowledge. Like, it seems like he's sort of arguing a different thing, right? Like he's saying like the fruitless search for total knowledge leads to delusion. And we don't get a great idea of his idea of like formations of knowledge and relations of power. Seems like he's sort of just like focusing on something different. So I'd say this is actually the one that's not mentioned. Because I'm not sure, I'm going to look for an example of terms that Baudrillard came up with to explain his view, which I feel like is probably mentioned. So I'm just going to like skim for something with like quotation marks or italicized, like something that would be like, oh, this is a term, simulated version of reality, or to use one of his neologisms, state of hyperreality. Yeah, so hyperreality, so this one is tough. So you might be able to tell through this that like, that this is just like Baudrillard's like, term hyperreality, because it's not a real term. If you know the word neologism, it literally means like new word. So you might be able to get from context this is Baudrillard's word, or you might be able to, or you might just know the word like neologism. And just to make sure that this is actually Baudrillard's word and not someone else, we get Baudrillard's view. He argued that. So yeah, it's definitely Baudrillard's word, right? Baudrillard, he argued that. So it's hyperreality. It sort of makes sense that like we would explain one of Baudrillard's like words, right? If the man likes coming up with words, we introduce one of them. This one is pretty tough. You either have to know the word neologism or understand that it's in quotation marks because it's a made-up word. Which of the following statements would Baudrillard most likely agree with about most post-structuralist theory of the formation of knowledge? So, we get that sense of like, from what we read before, right? We already read our stuff about formation of knowledge. And it was this idea that not that like Foucault and the other post-structuralists were wrong, but more they were like focusing on the wrong things. So I'm going to like do something like they're not like necessarily wrong, but they're not focusing on the right things. So because it is false, post-structuralists have an untrue idea of what actually leads to formation of knowledge. No, I don't like the false. Post-structuralists have focused too much on their own theory, ignored crucial other elements of the formation of knowledge. That seems pretty good, right? Like this whole idea of like, they're not wrong, but they should be paying attention to other things. Okay. Because it's only partially true, post-structuralists have ignored other ways in which knowledge is formed. I don't think I get a good sense of whether it's partially true or partially false. Like it's more like just like focus on other things. D, although it is true, it is not the most important fact. No. It is true, but it has the potential to mislead people. No. So yeah, I think this really just comes down to it's not super clear whether he believes it's true or false, right? He just thinks it's like misplaced focus. What is the primary purpose of the third paragraph? All right, so we get this thing here, right? Baudrillard argued that the excess of signs and of meaning in late 20th century global society had caused an effacement of reality. So we get this, right? That excess of signs and of meaning in global society caused an effacement of reality. And we get this word accordingly, which is really important, right? Because it means he's agreeing with something that's up here. So I'm going to look at like the context. This is not to say that the world becomes unreal, ... So this is the accordingly, right? The faster and more comprehensive. So this is part of the hyper reality, right? It's simulated hyper reality. The world doesn't become unreal. So yeah, you see this connection, unreal and hyper reality, right? And it's like accordingly, it's this hyper reality. And then we get like, sort of this elaboration. So it's definitely this like elaboration on the last sentence or two here in the second paragraph, because that's what the accordingly word means. To explain another way in which Baudrillard differs from post-structuralists, no, I don't love that. Like it's true, but it's like not like just like, and another example, like it's very much following on from the end of the second paragraph. To elaborate on how hyper-reality has destabilized society, yeah, I like that. To create a contrast between signs and symbols, didn't see anything in that. To argue we do not live in a global village, didn't see that. To show how modern society needs to better understand self, didn't see that. So yeah, when we get this like primary purpose sort of question, yeah, that's when it's really important to actually do like context, right? Like if I see a word accordingly, I know I have to go back up and see it. It can be inferred from the passage that which of the following is true about symbols in modern society. I don't even remember when we talked about symbols. Let's see. We talked about signs a bunch. Signs are in the third paragraph. Do we talk about symbols? Symbols. All right. While the world's excess of signs can be exchanged like commodities, bought, sold, and priced, symbols operate quite differently. They're exchanged like gifts. They cannot be priced in the same way as signs and thus cannot be valued in modern society. All right, so this is kind of crazy, but I think I get it. So the world's excess of signs, so we've got too many signs, and they can be exchanged like commodities. They can be bought, sold, and priced. So for somehow we're like buying and selling signs, but symbols can't be like bought and sold and priced like that. They need to be exchanged like gifts. all right, so like we're not buying and selling symbols, we're exchanging them like gifts, and we're not pricing them, and so they can't be valued. All right. Let's see. Because they are lacking, symbols have become a rare and precious commodity. No, they're exactly not a commodity, right? Signs are the commodity, symbols aren't. Because they're commonplace, symbols have become devalued in relation to signs. No, I don't think the commonplace part is anywhere. It's impossible to value symbols without treating them as a commodity. That seems more like too broad, right? It is impossible to do it. It's just like modern society is not doing it rather than it's impossible. Terrorism is the ultimate symbolic act of modern society. Didn't see that. Unlike signs, symbols cannot be compared to an objective metric. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was the whole thing about like symbols can't be priced, signs can't be priced. Again, I don't know what that means. I'm just saying these words. Like if you ask me to write an essay, like what does it mean that signs can be priced but symbols can't? I would be unable to. But I don't need to. I just need to like understand that all he's saying is signs can be priced and symbols cannot. I mean, who knows? I don't even know if Baudrillard knows what he's saying here. Which of the following is most analogous to Baudrillard's view of what happens when a subject tries to understand an object? I didn't remember seeing that. Let me go back to here. Subject, object. Where do I talk about subject, object? Nope, this is about the words. I see subject. Subject, object. Cool. All right, let me read that sentence. In Baudrillard's view, the human subject may try to understand the non-human object, but because the object can only be understood according to what it signifies, this never produces the desired results. All right, I mean, this is tough, but it's like the human, the person, the subject, tries to understand the non-human object. So you're looking at something, you're like, I want to understand that, but you can only understand it according to what it signifies. So I guess like you can't actually understand the thing itself, but it's more like, what does it mean? I think that's what he means by signifies, right? It's like you can't understand the thing itself. You only understand like, like you can't understand the thing itself. You have to understand what it means. Like what's the purpose of it or something like that. So I think I get that. I mean, that's weird, but like, when a subject tries to understand an object, he doesn't understand it because he doesn't get what it means. All right. A doctor examines a patient and is misled by his nurse's report of what to look for. I don't think so. Like, that's not like what it means. That's being misled by someone else. A financial analyst uses chart analyses to come to an abstract understanding. No, that's not being misled at all. A teacher looks at a student's doodles and misunderstands them because they represent a private joke between the student and his friends. I mean, that seems right. It's like this whole idea of like you try to understand it, but you can't because you don't get what it signifies. And you're misled, right? Misunderstand, misled. So that's pretty good. A lawyer is too rushed to fully examine the evidence, so comes to incomplete understanding of it. I didn't see anything about incomplete, and the too rushed doesn't seem right. A scientist decides to eliminate outliers from his data because he believes it to be the result of experimental error. I don't think that's right. It's not about eliminating outliers. So I'm gonna cross that off, and then I'm just left with C. So yeah, and then I'm done. And I've answered every question in this passage. It's a really tough passage. I still don't really get what it's about. And that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it's about. I don't need to write an essay on it. So I don't really care I don't really care about being able to argue it or being able to write an essay. I just know enough to answer the questions, and I did it. So that's how I use this process to answer like really difficult reading comprehension passages. So if you're interested in more content like this, passages, explanation, strategies, again, check out my Gumroad page. It's gumroad.com/Trevor Klee. If If you want to know more about me and about my LSAT tutoring, you can check out my tutoring page, which is trevorcleetutor.com. The most original of all web addresses, trevorcleetutor.com. All right, so that's pretty much it. Hope that was helpful. Please like and subscribe if it was. And yeah, I think this is probably the last of what I'm going to be doing for reading comprehension. Next up, I'm going to be doing some logical reasoning. If there are any other questions in reading comprehension, let me know. But otherwise, I'm going to be doing some logical reasoning. All right, thanks.